Hello students, welcome to the generic IKS lecture series. I am Dr. Padmashree Mujumdar, Assistant Professor, Department of Economics, Modern College, Shivajinagar, Pune 5. I am dealing with your lecture number 13 and lecture 14 of your syllabus module, which is related to Arthashastra. And as I have said, I will cover economics aspect of Arthashastra. This is my second lecture, and today we are going to cover trade and commerce in Arthashastra in this lecture. So let us begin with. Trade was considered by Arya Chanakya as a third pillar of economic activity. The initial two pillars were agriculture and cattle rearing. The aim of these three economic activities was to generate resources in the form of grains, cattle, gold, forest produce, or labor. The king obtained a treasury and army with the help of these resources, and that was suitable for him to use for domestic people and to control the enemies also. There were certain trade policies mentioned in Arthashastra. Those trade policies were related to domestic trade as well as foreign trade. Now let us begin with the trade policies mentioned in Arthashastra related to domestic trade. The state and private merchants, both local as well as foreign, were involved at the time of Chanakya in trade. The production and sale of the commodities are distributed between public as well as private sector. So there was presence of both public as well as government sector in the production and distribution of commodities. The chief controller of state trading was appointed and was given the responsibility for equitable distribution of local and foreign goods. Thus, the public distribution system was present at that particular time period. The chief controller of state trading used to sell crown commodities. What are crown commodities? Those are the crown commodities which were emerges from the crown properties, that is government properties, or the commodities which are acquired by the government. These commodities were directly distributed to public through the state-owned retail outlets or even by appointing private traders as an agent wherever the government outlets were not available. The chief controller of state trading was also responsible for regulating the trade practices of private merchants by inspecting them periodically. The government was also maintaining buffer stock of extra commodities. Kautilya has given list of guidelines for ensuring trade practices that we are going to study little later. And at the same time, the taxes and fines were also imposed on domestic private traders. Now let us move on to foreign trade policy. Kautilya was aware of the theory of gains from trade and understood the benefits of benefits which are received from integrated markets. He encouraged the policy of import promotion more. The policy measures like tax concession, liberal legislative actions, permission to earn higher profit margin were suggested to promote the imports. Export was also encouraged, but it was controlled by the state authority at that time. The chief controller of state trading was the official in charge of export. Kautilya advised to undertake foreign trade only if there was a profit or there were political or strategic advantages in trading these types of the commodities. However, he had discouraged export of weapons and valuable materials of the country. He recommended imposition of taxes on imports as well as exports. But according to him, the taxes should not be imposed to discourage the trade, but to earn revenue, which can further be utilized for the benefit of the public. Now, let us move on to the role assigned by Kautilya to state in the sense government in trade and commerce. Kautilya recognized the importance of state trading. The large part of trading was done directly by the state. The objective of state trading is to augment the revenue, that means increase the revenue of the state on one hand, and on the other hand, and most importantly, for achieving the welfare of the public. A special officer named Chief Controller of State Trading was appointed for the same. Various regulations were taken by this Chief Controller of State Trading pertaining to development of trade and commerce. So let us now focus our attention on role of state in domestic sales of commodities. The sale of all commodities belonging to the crown was centralized and conducted at a centralized place of the market. As I've said, the crown commodities were the commodities which were produced on crown property or received into the treasury by confiscating the commodities or by the way of fine. The state exercised monopoly on the sale of all these commodities. The officers in charge of sale of these goods would deposit the proceeds in a wooden box, and at the end of each day of sale, they would hand over the money box and the balance stock and their weighing and measuring instrument to the government. That was the practice which was followed then. Let us now pay attention towards the role of state in export of the commodities. The chief controller of state trading was monopolizing the export of crown commodities again. However, as said, the decision to export goods is based on comparative study of price received for the export commodities, price to be paid for imports. After calculating the margin between both and deducting all the expenses which are related to transport and taxes, if the whole calculation comes in profit, then the decision of exporting the product was usually taken. However, if no profit is likely to be made, then the officer should consider economic, political, and strategic advantages in exporting the product or importing of a particular product. So it was recommended by Kautilya that unnecessary export promotion should not be opted, and the export should not be done at the cost of domestic availabilities. The next role given to state by Kautilya was related to creation of buffer stock. The chief controller of state trading was given this responsibility to build up buffer stock if there was excess supply of a commodity. He has to pay higher price than the market price to create a buffer stock. This function was suitable for creating control over falling prices of the commodities. So the attempt was made then that to avoid a situation of falling prices and thus creating a kind of downswing in the market. And buffer stock was used to stabilize the prices at that time period. Now, the next point related to the role of state in trade and commerce was creation of warehousing. Chanakya has realized the importance of warehousing facility. A separate officer named Chief Superintendent of Warehouses was made in charge. He was responsible for maintaining the accounts of all commodities received into warehouse, classifying the inventories, etc. He was also responsible to reserve stock to deal the times of calamities and emergencies. In case the stock exhausts, then it is the responsibility of the chief superintendent of warehouses to replenish the old stock with the new one. The another role of state in trade and commerce stated by Kautilya was contribution in developing transportation. The role of transport was always important in trade. The trade routes were widened in the Mauryan regime. Transportation of goods by sea and land was essential function of the state according to Kautilya. The chief controller of shipping and ferries had wide range of responsibility like organizing ferries, supervising maritime safety, controlling movements of foreign merchants, or collecting revenue and keeping watch over all undesirable persons using such type of the ferries. He used to receive the information about all state monopoly commodities, imported as well as locally produced, and their demand and price fluctuations, etc. And on the basis of that, he used to put certain taxes on the commodities which he wanted to restrict from transportation. So this was overall role of the state assigned by Kautilya in trade and commerce. Now let us focus our attention on the basis of discussion so far done on the fair trade practices mentioned in Arthshatra. See, Arthashastra has given all these practices are that is to be utilized for benefit of trade. The first one was locally produced and imported good shall be sold for the benefit of the public. The second trade practice was in case of excess supply of commodity, a buffer stock shall be built up by paying a higher price than the prevailing market price. When the market price reaches to the support level, the buying price shall be changed according to the situation. Third principle, if the stock of commodities becomes excessive, then its sale should be canalized through state controlled outlay. And the merchant shall sell only from the accumulated stock until it is exhausted with no profit margin. It means Kautilya had provided attention towards excess availability of the output, as excess product always leads downfall in the economy. So to avoid that downfall, it was recommended to maintain this kind of stock of the commodities, and the role was assigned to the government. The fourth practice was related to surplus stock unaccounted in the hands of merchants shall be sold for the benefit of the public. The fifth principle was even a large profit shall be foregone if it is likely to cause harm to the public. And the last was no artificial scarcity shall be created by accumulation of commodities constantly in demand. If you carefully look at remaining three, that is last three principles, you would observe that these are some such trade practices recommended by Kautilya and Arthashastra, which always ensures welfare of the consumer, so that the artificial scarcity or unnecessary rise in price should not take place. Now, let us move on and focus on the regulation of marketplaces and trade routes. There were presence of wholesalers, retailers, direct marketeers in the trade channel. Goods which were sold by the producers themselves in the marketplace exhibit the pattern of direct marketing. The role of retailer was played by the agents who were selling the goods in the market without assuming the title of the commodity. That means the commodity is owned by somebody else. These are the traders who are just selling the product for margin. There were certain merchants who used to bought the goods from the domestic as well as foreign manufacturers and transported them in caravans and ships to the marketplace and sold these goods at marketplace and pocketed the earnings. These were called as wholesalers. There was also the presence of brokers and middlemen who were looked upon with little skepticism. The controller, the chief controller of private trading was responsible for regulation of the marketplaces, and he used to regulate the markets by adopting various measures. The first amongst the measures was ensure fair trading in new as well as old articles. He was given right to permit sale or pledging of old articles if the seller or mortgager can provide proof of ownership. The second measure was related to inspection of weights and measures used by the merchants in order to prevent the use of fraudulent weights and measures. This measure, this regulation was used to create control over the fraudulent practices and exploitation of a consumer. The third regulation adopted by the Chief Controller of Private Trading was to ensure that the profit margin of locally produced commodity should be 5%, and for the imported commodities, it should be interestingly 10% more than the domestic one that was recommended. The Chief Controller of Private Trading was also responsible to see that the merchants are not dealing in the stolen goods. The another regulation was related to orderly marketing. The Chief Controller of Private Trading was given the responsibility to reduce or to prevent the collective purchase of the commodity so that the commodities would be available into the market and the marketing practices will be according to right practices. Another principle was related with the appropriate exemptions that were offered by the Chief Controller of Private Trading to those merchants whose goods unfortunately gets damaged. Those exemptions were from taxes or any of the levies, fines, which were time and again imposed by the Chief Controller of Private Trading. The regulation of broker and middleman was also the responsibility of Chief Controller of Private Trading. He should ensure that merchants do not count the brokerage paid to the middleman as a part of their cost, and it should not be calculated in profit margin too. The broker should be allowed to hold stocks of grain and other commodities to the authorized level only. If the broker maintains the stock more than the authorized limit, then it should be confiscated and it should be made available to the public through the Chief Controller of State Trading. So any kind of black marketing or storage of the commodity unofficially was prevented. The last point of regulation of marketplace was related to control over the monopoly. And the state was given the right to impose monopoly tax to create a control over the monopoly. Now, let us begin with the regulation of trade routes. The development of trade routes was considered important for the development of trade and for overall development of a country. Kautilya had given preference to land route over the water route because according to him, water route is not usable at all times, not suitable at all times. They are not accessible at all places. They are only useful in some places. They are full of dangers and indefensible in contrast to the land routes. As regards to land routes, Kautilya have a kind of order of preference. According to him, one should go for south in the direction of Himalayas, as it is the most rich route as far as the resources and commodities are concerned. Among the water routes, a coastal route is better than one on the high sea because there are a large number of ports along the coastal route. A river route is also advisable. He considered river route as good because it possesses less serious dangers than that is the sea route, and it is mostly used constantly. Kautilya was of the opinion that unnecessary harassment on the trade routes of the traders by officials should be avoided. And he was also of the opinion that some tax revenue can be generated by the way of putting taxes on those types of the trade routes. Now, let us further focus our attention on the view of Arthshatra on foreign trade. The importance of foreign trade was considered as essential element of trade uh, by Kautilya. The trade routes are developed for the growth of the foreign trade. The state employed officers who traveled to the foreign lands as the dignitaries were used with more benefits by Arya Chanakya. They studied the buying and selling activities and consumption patterns of merchants and customers in the foreign market and recognized the potential markets for the sale of indigenous goods. So the major role was assigned by Kautilya to them for identification of markets to the domestic commodities. The Mauryan Empire built ships also, and the Mauryan Empire let the ship uh, given out for on hire for the transport as well as merchandise. The traders had to pledge their assets as collateral for hiring the ship for transporting their goods from one country to other country, one place to other place. The hiring fee was imposed by the state, which was to be paid upon the return of the vessels. The chief controller of state trading was monopolizing the export of crown commodities. And as I've said already, that the export of commodities was only permitted in case of profit, or in extreme cases, it was permitted if economic, political, and strategic advantages are assured by that export. Interestingly, Kautilya has supported import promotion policy. Imported goods, according to him, should be made available in all possible places and should be made available to the people in towns as well as countrysides. This is important according to him as it will improve the living standard and quality of life of people. Various tax exemptions were given to the importers to promote imports. Besides, legal actions was taken against the foreign merchants only in the extreme condition. The higher profit margin was also allowed for the imported goods, which was 10% as compared to 5%, which was permitted in local goods. The customs duty was imposed on imported commodities. The frontier officer had vested authority to inspect the caravans carrying the foreign goods, which further classify the goods as per their value. The chief controller of customs inspects it further, and dutiable goods were weighted, measured, and counted to ascertain the duty. The duty was paid at the port of entry. Certain commodities were used to be duty free. However, the chief controller of customs were given the permission to levy penalty on the violators who tried to cheat or escape any kind of payment of the duties. To conclude, we can say the policy of Kautilya on fair trade practices, state trading, development of state rule, encouragement to domestic as well as foreign trade aims at economic development of the country, as well as development and welfare of the people therein. All these policies had influence on contemporary development strategies. We could even see the relevance of this policy in present day economy. Thank you.